we are diving straight into the heart of what truly drives financial success. And I promise you, we are not going to talk about interest rates, the latest crypto trend, or even portfolio allocation models.
Not at all.
We are taking a mental shortcut, a deep dive into the timeless lessons of Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money.
That's our mission today. We are challenging, really, the core belief system of traditional finance.
How so?
Well, for too long, financial success has been taught like physics, as if there were these predictable rules, immutable laws, and, equations you just need to solve.
Right, like if you just get the math right, you'll be rich.
Exactly. But Housel argues that finance is not physics, it's psychology. It's driven by emotion, nuance, and your own deeply ingrained behavior.
Okay, let's unpack this right out of the gate with an immediate and shocking contrast. Because the sources give us these 3 case studies that absolutely defy traditional logic.
They really do.
Let's start with the genius who, by all accounts, should have been financially invincible but went spectacularly broke.
Right. This individual was a technology executive, a person of truly staggering intellect. In his 20s, he designed and patented a key component that is literally fundamental to modern Wi-Fi routers.
So a legitimate genius.
Absolutely. He started and sold several highly successful businesses. If intelligence, education, and opportunity guaranteed success, this man should be a billionaire several times over.
But his relationship with money was? Well, it was described as a mix of insecurity and childish stupidity.
That's putting it mildly. The anecdotes are legendary.
We're talking about a man who carried a stack of $100 bills, several inches thick, just to show it off, often loudly and while he was drunk.
And this behavior just escalated into these almost cartoonish displays of recklessness. There's the story where he instructed a colleague to buy thousands of dollars worth of gold coins.
For what?
So he and his friends could stand by a dock overlooking the Pacific Ocean and skip them across the water.
You're kidding me.
Like skipping stones. It was a drunken game out of whose coin went furthest. Just pure destruction of wealth for a laugh.
And that's not even the most outrageous one. What about the hotel lamp?
Oh, that one. Right. A hotel manager asked him to pay for a $500 lamp he'd shattered in the restaurant. And he didn't just pay it.
No, he pulled out this huge brick of cash, and asked the manager if they really only wanted $500.
Then threw $5,000 at him, just, telling him to get out of his face. It was almost a demonstration of financial contempt.
And as the source material points out, you can't maintain that level of contempt for wealth indefinitely.
No, you can't. And years later, we learn that this genius, with all his intellectual prowess and patents, he was completely bankrupt.
So his intelligence, his success, it offered zero insulation against his own bad behavior.
None whatsoever.
Now, hold that thought. The genius who went broke due to behavior. And let's pivot to the exact opposite end of the spectrum. Meet Ronald James Reed.
Ronald Reed. His Wikipedia entry lists him as an American philanthropist, investor, janitor, and gas station attendant.
Quite the resume.
Yeah. Ronald Reed was born in rural Vermont, and he was the first person in his entire family to even finish high school, which at the time was a monumental task in itself.
And his career.
He fixed cars at a gas station for 25 years, and then he swept floors at JCPenney for 17 years. His life was, the definition of humble.
He bought a small 2-bedroom house for, $12,000?
$12,000 when he was 38 and lived there for the rest of his life. His main hobby was chopping firewood.
He sounds like the neighbor you'd never, ever notice.
Exactly. But when he died in 2014 at age 92, he made international headlines.
Why?
Because out of the nearly 3 million Americans who died that year, fewer than 4,000 had a net worth exceeding $8 million. And Ronald Reed was one of them.
Wow. So the community was just baffled.
Completely baffled. People who knew him couldn't figure it out. Did he win the lottery? Did he inherit money? No.
So what was the secret?
The secret was so simple, it's almost offensive. Reed saved what little he could, invested consistently in blue chip stocks. The boring names.
And he just waited.
He waited. He did the one thing the genius executive couldn't do. He waited for decades as tiny, consistent savings compounded into more than $8 million.
That patience, that capacity for long-term survival and low-key living delivered this extraordinary outcome.
And he left $2 million to his stepchildren and more than $6 million to his local hospital and library.
Just incredible. And to hammer the point home, there's one more example. Richard Fuscone.
Right, Richard Fuscone, he illustrates the exact same fatal flaw as the genius executive. Fuscone was a Harvard-educated Merrill Lynch executive with an MBA, the absolute pedigree of traditional financial success.
He retired early because he was supposedly so successful.
But he borrowed heavily in the mid-2000s to expand an 18,000-square-foot home in Greenwich, Connecticut.
We're talking about a mansion with 11 bathrooms, 2 pools, 7 garages.
And maintenance costs that soared over $90,000 a month.
So when the 2008 financial crisis hit,
He was wiped out. His high debt load, his illiquid assets. He had no cash flow, faced bankruptcy, and his mansion, which had features like a see-through covering over the indoor pool so guests could dance on it.
that mansion was sold in foreclosure.
It was, and this was just 5 months before Ronald Reed, the janitor, died a multimillionaire.
So you have Ronald Reed, the patient janitor who survived and achieved freedom, versus Richard Fuscone, the Harvard executive who succumbed to impatience and greed.
Right, and that behavioral gap completely eclipsed all the massive differences in their education and their opportunity.
It's the unique physics of finance. You just don't see this in other industries. You don't see a janitor with no formal training massively outperforming a Harvard-trained surgeon or a world-class architect.
Exactly. Financial success is a soft skill. It's the psychology of money, and it is dangerously underappreciated. We focus on the math, but knowing what to do tells you nothing about the internal drama that unfolds in your head when you actually try to execute the plan.
The lesson is so clear. Your behavior is the single most important variable. And if we accept that, we have to start understanding why people behave the way they do, even when it seems completely irrational to us.
Precisely. And this leads us to our first deep concept. No one's crazy.
Okay, I have to challenge that premise immediately.
Oh.
If I watch a genius throw thousands of dollars of gold coins into the ocean, or if I see a family spending their emergency fund on lottery tickets, that seems pretty textbook crazy to me.
It seems crazy to you, and that's the point of the framework. The core problem here is relativity. People do what seems crazy with money, but no one is fundamentally crazy.
So what are they doing then?
They are just operating based on their own unique, deeply personal, and highly persuasive experiences.
So you're saying my personal history with money acts as an 80% weight on my mental model, even if that history is statistically insignificant compared to global financial events.
Exactly. Your personal experiences might be 0.000000001% of what happened in the world, but they anchor 80% of how you think the world should work.
So if you grew up during a depression, or if your parents lost everything in 2008,
Your tolerance for risk will be profoundly different from someone who only saw bull markets. And this difference isn't about intelligence, it's about life history and, emotional scarring.
let's pull the data on that because the sources show how arbitrary this anchor can be based purely on when you were born.
Yeah, consider two equally smart investors separated by only 2 decades of birth. The investor born in 1970 reached their teens and 20s, the years they formed their core financial view during a massive, sustained economic boom.
So for them, stocks only go up.
Pretty much. The S&P 500 increased almost tenfold, inflation adjusted during that time. Their foundational view is that the market is a wealth engine.
But the investor born just 20 years earlier, in 1950,
During their teens and 20s, adjusted for inflation, the market went literally nowhere.
wow. So you have two equally capable individuals who walk through life with completely different foundational views of stocks.
Right. The first person sees every dip as a buying opportunity. The second sees every dip as potential ruin.
And this relativity defines entire careers.
It does. The legendary bond manager, Bill Gross, he admitted that the success of his entire career coincided almost perfectly with a generational collapse in interest rates.
So to him, bonds were these amazing wealth-generating machines.
But to someone who dealt with the rampant inflation of the 1960s, bonds looked like a way to guarantee you losing money.
And inflation is the perfect example of this experience bias. If you experienced 1960s inflation, you remember prices tripling, gas lines snaking around the block.
Your paycheck shrinking monthly? That emotional anchor is real. It's visceral.
But if you were born in 1990, inflation has been a non-issue for your entire life.
You'd likely view certain financial anxieties about holding debt or spending freely as overblown, because your personal history has never signaled that level of danger. You cannot study a textbook and truly replicate the emotional weight of that fear.
The book's comparison of John F. Kennedy's view of the Great Depression versus the average American's view is really telling here.
It really is. JFK, whose family fortune increased during the Depression, said his only memory was reading about it at Harvard.
He had no emotional anchor point for financial fear.
None. His family experienced unprecedented wealth accumulation during a crisis. And that's a reality. You can't expect people who have experienced such wildly different realities to respond to the same financial advice in the same way.
So how does this relativity apply to those decisions that look utterly insane to outsiders? Let's talk about the Foxconn worker anecdote.
Right. So the sources reference an American reader who looks at the Foxconn manufacturing environment in China and sees an atrocious sweatshop, model-long hours, tiny wages, hard work.
A perspective that's anchored in modern Western expectations of labor rights and standards.
Exactly. But the worker's nephew wrote this powerful comment explaining that his aunt's previous job had been prostitution.
So for her,
For her, working long hours for a predictable small wage in a factory was a profound improvement and a far better form of exploitation. Her starting point fundamentally shifts the perspective on risk, reward, and worth.
and that leads us straight to the lottery paradox. This is the financial behavior that generates the most judgment.
It really is. Americans spend more on lottery tickets than on movies, video games, music, sports, and books combined.
Combined, that's insane. And the crucial data point, the lowest income households spend 4 times more on average than the highest.
Yeah, 40% of Americans can't cover a $400 emergency, and many of them are the same people who are blowing $400 a year or more on lottery tickets.
To the educated, financially stable person, this seems like textbook irrationality.
It does. But step into their shoes through the lens of their life history. Saving $400,000 for a deposit on a house feels impossible. Earning a massive wage increase feels impossible.
So the lottery ticket is the only tangible dream they can buy.
It's the only momentary feeling that they might achieve the good stuff that others take for granted. They aren't paying for a rational investment return. They are paying for a dream, for hope, for a momentary release.
So in their personal reality, that decision is reasonable.
It is. And this difficulty is compounded by the fact that the tools we use for modern financial decisions are incredibly new. We treat saving and investing as if they are ancient concepts, but the framework for dignified mass retirement is only, 2 generations old?
Right. Think about pre-World War II reality. Until the 1940s, the labor force participation rate for men over 65 was over 50%.
The expectation was that you worked until you died. Social Security offered tiny initial benefits. The idea that everyone deserves decades of comfortable retirement is really a 1980s concept.
And the specific tools. The 401k, the backbone of U.S. retirement savings, didn't exist until 1978.
And the Roth IRA didn't appear until 1998. When we scratch our heads at young people making bad student loan decisions or poor retirement choices, we forget we are all novices, just winging it because we lack decades of accumulated societal experience to guide us.
So the takeaway is humbling. We are all newbies, making decisions based on incomplete and highly unique personal histories. That means we should replace judgment with empathy when viewing other people's financial choices.
And this idea of unique personal history has a close sibling, the messy role of luck and risk.
Okay, this section's guiding principle is almost philosophical. Nothing is as good or as bad as it seems. We love to simplify success stories into skill and failures into bad decisions, but the sources force us to acknowledge the forces outside of our control.
And we can start with the staggering 1 in a million luck that helped forge Bill Gates' success. Gates is undeniably brilliant and driven, but his trajectory was set by an astronomical fluke.
Which was?
He attended Lakeside School, one of only a handful of high schools globally that had a computer in 1968.
In 1968. That's incredible.
Oh. And this wasn't some basic piece of kit. It was a teletype Model 30 terminal connected to a General Electric mainframe advanced technology that most university graduate schools didn't have access to.
How did a high school even get that?
The Mothers Club raised $3,000 at a rummage sale to lease it.
A rummage sale.
A rummage sale. Gates and Paul Allen, both completely obsessed, had hundreds, thousands of hours of unsupervised free computer time outside the curriculum. They got a decade-long head start on the rest of the world.
And the odds of that?
Statistically, in 1968, there were 303 million high school-age people globally. Only 300 attended Lakeside. That's a literal 1 in a million chance.
And Gates himself admits it.
He does. He says, if there had been no Lakeside, there would have been no Microsoft.
That's incredible. But for every story of 1 in a million luck, there is the dark, tragic parallel of 1 in a million risk. And that's where Ken Evans comes in.
Right. Ken Evans was Gates's best friend, equally skilled, equally ambitious, and inseparable from Gates during those early computing days.
They were a team.
They were. They solved complex scheduling problems together. They schemed about their future business ventures. Evans was just as capable as Gates.
But Kent Evans died in a mountaineering accident before graduating high school.
And in the U.S., the odds of a high school student being killed in a mountaineering accident are also roughly 1 in a million.
So Gates experienced 1 in a million luck that jump-started his career. Evans experienced 1 in a million risk that ended his life.
The same arbitrary accidental forces just working in opposing directions. The key insight is that the accidental forces outside your control can often be more consequential than your own purchase decisions.
And because luck is so hard to quantify, we just ignore it. Nobel laureate Robert Shiller said what he most wants to know is the exact role of luck in successful outcomes. But we never hear investors talk about that.
We ignore it because we have this deep psychological need for simple stories of agency. We attribute others' failures to bad decisions, they deserved it, and our own failures to the dark side of risk, so it wasn't our fault.
Right. And conversely, we celebrate our successes as pure skill, while dismissing others' good fortune is just blind luck.
But trying to emulate success stories found on the cover of Forbes, these extreme outliers, is so dangerous because we might be imitating merely okay or even reckless decisions that were simply paired with extraordinary luck.
This is where the line between bold and reckless becomes completely invisible without the benefit of hindsight.
Absolutely. Think of Cornelius Vanderbilt. He knowingly broke laws to expand his railroad empire. When told he was violating statutes, he famously replied, "My God, John, you don't suppose you can run a railroad in accordance with the statutes of the state of New York, do you?"
And historians celebrate this as cunning and scrappy, a visionary who was ahead of his time.
But no sane person recommends crime as an entrepreneurial treat today. John D. Rockefeller similarly circumvented laws and was called no better than a common thief in his time, yet now he's celebrated as a genius.
So it's impossible to distinguish bold vision from flagrant crime without knowing the outcome.
Completely. If Vanderbilt had been caught and jailed, his story would be a cautionary tale. Since he succeeded, it's a masterclass in business.
Even Benjamin Graham, the father of value investing, made a huge chunk of his fortune from Geico stock, which he admitted violated his own rules on diversification.
He asked, one lucky break or one supremely shrewd decision? Can we tell them apart?
And the answer is no.
We cannot. So the lesson for you is profound. Focus less on the specific actions of extreme case studies like Buffett or Gates, because the role of luck is so high, they are often the least applicable to your life.
Instead, focus on broad, common patterns.
Exactly, like realizing that people who control their time are happier. That's a reliable, actionable insight, totally divorced from luck.
Success is a terrible teacher. It makes you think you can't lose. But failure is also a terrible teacher if it convinces you that your decision was catastrophic when you simply ran into the unforgiving reality of risk.
The trick is arranging your financial life to survive until the statistical probabilities fall in your favor.
And survival is the ultimate hurdle when we discuss the concept of never enough. When even the rich, who should logically be secure, throw it all away for more.
This brings us to that famous Joseph Heller quote, shared with Vanguard founder John Bogle. They were at a party hosted by a billionaire.
And Heller was told the host had made more money in one day than Heller had made on his classic book, Catch-22, over its entire history.
And Heller replied, "Yes, but I have something he will never have, enough."
That is the hardest financial skill in the world, getting the goalpost to stop moving.
And we can look at the devastation caused by the failure to acknowledge enough, starting with Rajat Gupta.
Gupta had one of the great modern success stories. Orphaned in Kolkata, he overcame everything to become the CEO of McKinsey. By 2008, he was worth $100 million.
$100 million, think about that. Even a conservative 5% annual return is nearly $600 an hour, 24 hours a day, without lifting a finger.
But he wanted to be in the billionaire circle.
His desire for more something he didn't need drove him to crime. He was on the Goldman Sachs board when he learned that Warren Buffett was about to invest $5 billion into the bank during the crisis.
And 16 seconds after hanging up from that board meeting, he called hedge fund manager Rajaratnam and tipped him off.
Rajaratnam immediately bought 175,000 shares, making $1 million in profit when the deal went public hours later.
And it ultimately cost Gupta his reputation, his career, and his freedom.
And look at Bernie Madoff. Before his massive Ponzi scheme, Madoff ran a legitimately successful market-making business, earning between $25 and $50 million annually. He was already wealthy.
But he still ran the scheme that wiped out countless people.
It just, I always come back to the core question, why? Why did they risk everything they had and needed for something they didn't have and didn't need?
Warren Buffett summarized this perfectly when talking about the failure of the hedge fund long-term capital management.
He said, to make money they didn't have and didn't need, they risked what they did have and did need. And that's foolish. It is just plain foolish.
The psychological fuel for this foolishness is the moving goalpost.
Yeah, if your expectations for happiness and success constantly rise with your actual results, striving for more yields, zero increase in satisfaction, you achieve a goal, but instantly the bar moves 2 steps ahead for every step you took forward.
And this is catastrophically fueled by the social comparison trap.
The ceiling for comparison is impossibly high and constantly visible thanks to the modern world. A rookie baseball player making $500,000 a year feels broke next to his teammate Mike Trout, who is making $36 million.
And Trout compares himself to the top hedge fund managers who earn $770 million annually.
And those managers look at the person above them, like Jeff Bezos, whose net worth increased by $24 billion in a single year, a sum that equates to more per hour than that $500,000 baseball player made all year.
It's a game with an impossible ceiling.
The only way to win the social comparison game is to not fight it at all. It's the equivalent of the casino dealer telling the author's friend, the only way to win in a Las Vegas casino is to exit as soon as you enter.
That acceptance, the knowledge that you have enough, is the only defense against inevitable regret.
So enough isn't about being financially conservative, it's about avoiding the point of regret.
And what do we risk when we fail to acknowledge that line?
You risk the truly invaluable things. The things that no amount of money can buy and no amount of return can replace.
Your reputation, your freedom, your independence.
Your family, your friends, the capacity to be loved, and your happiness. Your best shot at keeping those things is knowing exactly when to start taking risks.
And securing those invaluable things comes down to the most unintuitive yet most powerful force in finance: confounding compounding.
Our minds simply are not built for exponential math. We think linearly, but wealth grows exponentially. To illustrate this counterintuitive power, Housel uses the Ice Age analogy.
Right. Ice ages are monumental, world-changing events, and you would assume they require a massive, catastrophic force.
But the theory by Milutin Milankovitch showed they are caused by tiny, almost insignificant changes in the Earth's orbital tilt relative to the Sun.
The crucial mechanism isn't brutally cold winters, but moderately cool summers.
A summer that fails to melt the previous winter's snow leaves behind a residual ice base. That base accumulates, reflects more light, exacerbates cooling, and suddenly, year after year, in a geological blink, you have a miles-thick continental ice sheet.
The lesson is so clear. You don't need tremendous force or massive upheaval to create tremendous results if something compounds consistently.
It just needs a persistent, small, non-zero starting base. And this is the real secret behind Warren Buffett's fortune.
Which is constantly analyzed as a feat of investment acumen.
But it's fundamentally a feat of time.
Buffett's net worth is around $84.5 billion. But wait, let me get this right. $81.5 billion of that total was accumulated after he qualified for Social Security in his mid-60s.
That's right. It just defies logic.
He is, without question, a phenomenal investor, generating extraordinary 22% annual returns.
But the real key is being a phenomenal investor for 3/4 of a century, starting at age 10. Longevity is the magic bullet.
Let's run the thought experiment from the sources. If Buffett had been a normal human, started investing seriously at age 30 with a modest net worth, and retired at 60,
To go play golf like most people.
even maintaining his extraordinary 22% annual return, his net worth today would only be $11.9 million.
Only $11.9 million. So you're telling me that 99.9% of his actual net worth is purely a function of not selling and not dying.
That's astonishing. His skill is investing, but his secret is time.
And we can prove this by contrasting him with a statistically superior investor, Jim Simons of Renaissance Technologies.
Who has compounded money at an unparalleled 66% annually since 1988.
Simons is objectively the greatest investor by average returns, but he only found his investment stride at age 50. His net worth is $21 billion, still astronomical, but 75% less rich than Buffett.
Simply because he had less than half the years to compound.
It's that non-linear growth that's so hard to grasp. We think of 8 plus 8 plus 8, but compounding thinks 8 by 8 by 8.
Like hard drive storage. From 1950 to 1990, we gained 296 megabytes of storage globally. From 1990 until today, we gained 100 million megabytes.
That growth explodes so fast it even tripped up Bill Gates, who in 2004 criticized the new Gmail, asking why anyone would ever need a whole gigabyte of storage. He couldn't intuitively grasp the compounding growth of technology.
So we spend all our energy trying to earn the highest returns, chasing that 25% annual figure.
Because it intuitively seems like the best way to get rich. But the sources argue that good investing is not about earning the highest returns. It's about earning pretty good returns that you can stick with and repeat for the longest period of time.
That's when the ice age starts.
It is. And that sticking with it requires a completely different psychological framework. The mindset difference between getting wealthy versus staying wealthy.
Getting wealthy requires risk, optimism, putting yourself out there.
But there is only one way to stay wealthy. Some combination of frugality, paranoia, and deep humility. Good investing is not about making good decisions consistently. It's about consistently not screwing up.
We see this fragility in the tragic story of Jesse Livermore. He was the greatest stock market trader of his day. In 1929, he shorted the market, betting on the crash.
And made the equivalent of more than $3 billion in one day.
Wow. But that same day, Abraham Germansky, a multimillionaire real estate developer who was levered long on the market, was utterly ruined.
He was last seen tearing strips of ticker tape into tiny bits on the street and then disappeared, likely having taken his own life.
But the story tragically circles back. Just 4 years after his $3 billion blowout, Livermore, overflowing with arrogance and confidence, started taking larger and larger bets.
He lost everything, became ashamed, and ultimately took his own life.
Both men were geniuses at getting wealthy, but they were terrible at the survival skills needed to stay wealthy.
Capitalism is brutal. 40% of public companies eventually lose all their value. You need humility and fear to survive.
That survival mindset is what differentiates the enduring greats.
Michael Moritz, the head of Sequoia Capital, said the secret to their 4 decades of success was that they were always afraid of going out of business. They operate assuming tomorrow will be nothing like yesterday.
And look at Warren Buffett again. We attribute his success to his 22% annual returns, but it's just as much about what he didn't do.
Right. He didn't panic and sell during the 14 recessions he lived through. He didn't use too much debt. He didn't suffer burnout. And he didn't sully his reputation with fraud. He survived.
Contrast him with Rick Guerin, the third member of the legendary Buffett-Munger trio. Guerin was equally smart, but he was in a hurry.
During the 1973-74 downturn, he was levered up with margin loans. When the market dropped 70%, he got margin calls and was forced to sell his Berkshire stock at rock-bottom prices to Buffett.
He was forced out of the game simply because he lacked the capacity to survive the short-term misery.
Nassim Taleb summarizes this perfectly. Having an edge and surviving are two different things. The first requires the second. You need to avoid ruin at all costs.
So, if survival and longevity are the cornerstones, how do we apply this mindset in our daily financial life? The sources give us 3 actionable pillars for survival.
Pillar 1. Prioritize financial unbreakability. More than chasing big returns, you must prioritize being financially unbreakable. Because if you are unbreakable, you will stick around long enough for compounding to work its silent, logical magic.
I know the feeling. Nobody wants to hold cash during a bull market. The gap between a 1% cash return and a 10% stock return feels painful.
It does. But if that cash prevents you from having to sell your stocks during a bear market, when the market is down 30% and you need to pay for a surprise roof replacement, the actual return on that cash is immense.
It prevents one desperate, ill-timed sale that could wipe out years of gains. It's insurance against fragility.
Pillar 2. Plan on the plan, not going the plan. Financial plans are essential, but few written plans survive contact with reality.
You cannot foresee the major global events that shape markets. 9/11, the housing bust, the subsequent crisis, or a global pandemic.
Therefore, a good plan must embrace room for error, a margin of safety. This isn't just about being conservative, it's about increasing the odds of survival at any given level of risk.
A frugal budget, flexible thinking, or a loose timeline for your goals ensures that if a recession hits or you lose your job, your plan doesn't immediately shatter.
The more fragile your financial life is, the more specific and perfect every single element of your plan must be.
Pillar 3. Adopt a barbelled personality, optimism, and paranoia.
You must be deeply optimistic that the long-term trajectory is up and to the right, because historically the U.S. standard of living increased 20-fold over the last 170 years.
But you must be equally paranoid about the short-term misery. That 170 years of growth came despite 1.3 million Americans dying in 9 major wars, 4 presidents being assassinated, 33 recessions lasting a cumulative 48 years.
And 99.9% of all companies created going out of business. If you are optimistic without paranoia, you won't survive the short term. If you are paranoid without optimism, you'll miss the greatest growth of all time.
This mindset is hard because nuance is uncomfortable.
But you need short-term paranoia to keep you alive long enough to exploit long-term optimism. Livermore learned this too late. A great many smashes by brilliant men can be traced directly to the swelled head.
This leads us to another highly counterintuitive concept that underlies why survival is so critical. Tails, you win.
The idea is simple. You can be wrong half the time and still make a fortune. This is fundamental to understanding how wealth is created, whether in art, business, or stocks.
Take Heinz Gruen, the legendary art dealer who sold his massive collection of Picassos, Klees, and Matisses for well over 100 million euros.
How could one person consistently collect masterpieces? The insight is that he operated like an index fund. He bought vast quantities of art, sat on it for a long period, and waited for the few winners to emerge.
99% of his acquisitions were likely of little value.
But it didn't matter if the other 1% turned out to be a Picasso or a Klee. Berggruen could be wrong most of the time and still end up stupendously right, thanks to the massive asymmetric payoff of the tail events.
This long tail effect is everywhere in business. Walt Disney produced more than 400 cartoons by the mid-1930s, many of which lost money.
But Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs changed everything. The $8 million it earned in the first 6 months of 1938 paid off all the company debts, bought a new studio, and cemented his celebrity status.
In business terms, those 83 minutes were the only thing that mattered.
Look at venture capital. Studies show 65% of financings lose money. The majority of the industry's returns come from 0.5% of companies that return 50 times or more on investment.
But here's the shocker for public market investors. The index you own operates the exact same way.
The Russell 3000 index increased 73-fold since 1980. However, 40% of the companies in that index lost at least 70% of their value and never recovered.
So effectively, all of the market's spectacular returns came from just 7% of outlier companies. The Microsofts, the Walmarts, the Amazons.
The market's success is a few massive winners offsetting thousands of failures.
And even within those winners, it's all tails. Amazon Web Services, AWS, is a massive tail event inside a company that constantly experiments with failures, like the Fire Phone.
Jeff Bezos famously said, "If you think that's a big failure, we're working on much bigger failures right now."
This teaches you to be tolerant of failure, both in your own portfolio and in the companies you invest in. You can be wrong often, but you only need 1 or 2 massive wins-tail events to make a fortune.
And this realization applies directly to your behavior as an investor. Napoleon defined a military genius as the man who can do the average thing when all those around him are going crazy.
Investing is the same. Your success will be determined not by what you do every day, but by how you respond during the small number of days, likely 1% of the time or less, when everyone else around you is panicking or going euphoric.
Right. The simulation of the 3 investors, Sue, Jim, and Tom, is stunning. Sue invests $1 every month, rain or shine, even during the 22% of the time the economy was in or near a recession.
And Jim and Tom try to time the market, selling out during downturns.
Sue ends up with $435,000. Jim and Tom end up with about $257,000 and $234,000 respectively.
So by simply keeping her cool during the few months of recessionary panic, Sue ends up with almost 3/4 more money than the timers.
The most important point is that because investing is driven by tails, you have to accept that most financial advice and most days are irrelevant.
How you behaved during a few months in late 2008 and early 2009 likely had more impact on your lifetime returns than everything you did in the 8 years prior.
And this tail-driven world means we must abandon the notion that history is a map of the future.
Stanford professor Scott Sagan's quote is essential here. Things that have never happened before happen all the time. Investors constantly use history as a guide to the future. It's the historians as prophets fallacy.
But finance is guided by people's feelings and changing preferences, unlike hard sciences. The problem with relying on history is that you miss the outliers that move the needle the most.
A few people and a handful of events, World War II, 9/11, vaccines shaped the majority of the last century's direction. These are outliers, and they are unpredictable.
And it's hard to trace 19 hijackers on 9/11 to $1.6 trillion in student loan debt, but the chain reaction is real.
9/11 led to Fed rate cuts, which helped drive the housing bubble, which caused the financial crisis, which created a poor jobs market, which led millions to seek college.
Which hyperinflated student loan debt. Unprecedented compounding effects.
And the problem is the precedent trap. When you use past worst-case scenarios, like the Great Depression, to guide your fear, you are accidentally assuming that the next unprecedented event won't be worse than the last one.
You need to build a plan for events that are genuinely unknown. The Fukushima nuclear reactor was built to withstand the worst past historical earthquake, failing to account for the surprise of a truly unprecedented event.
And that realization that the future is unpredictable and success relies on survival should fundamentally change how we define wealth.
Which brings us to the highest dividend money pays is control over time, freedom.
Control over your life is the most dependable predictor of positive well-being, according to research by Angus Campbell, more so than salary, house size, or job prestige.
The highest, most valuable, and often incalculable dividend money pays is the ability to wake up every morning and say, I have control over what I do today.
Money's true intrinsic value is its ability to buy time. It's a value chain. Small wealth buys a few sick days off.
More buys time to wait for a good job after a layoff.
And even more buys the flexibility to choose a lower-paying but more purposeful job.
The host's personal anecdote about investment banking is a perfect illustration of the psychological concept of reactance, even though the work was stimulating and the pay was high.
The schedule was completely controlled by the boss. Having every waking second enslaved to external demands turned a high-paying job into a miserable experience.
Doing something you love on a schedule you can't control feels exactly like doing something you hate.
And what do people value later in life? Gerontologist Carl Pilmer surveyed 1,000 elderly Americans. Not a single person valued working hard to buy things or keeping up with the wealthy.
They valued quality, unstructured time with family and friends. The elders' wisdom is simple. Your kids don't want your money anywhere near as much as they want you.
Yet we are constantly pushed toward the opposite, driven by the low dividend of money. The man in the car paradox.
The paradox is that no one is impressed with your possessions as much as you are.
I remember working as a valet and seeing a Ferrari pull up. When I saw that beautiful machine, I never thought, wow, that driver's cool. I thought, wow, if I drove that car, people would think I'm cool.
Exactly. People pursue wealth primarily to signal status and admiration, but others inevitably use that conspicuous spending as a benchmark for their own aspirations.
They bypass admiring the spender and jump straight to desiring the object for themselves.
If respect and admiration are your goal, kindness, humility, and empathy will always bring you more long-term respect than horsepower ever will.
This realization requires a crucial redefinition. Wealth is what you don't see.
We judge wealth by what's visible, the fancy car, the big house. We can't see bank accounts, investment portfolios, or unspent income.
The story of Roger, the valet's acquaintance who drove a Porsche that was later repossessed because he defaulted on the loan, is a classic example.
Outward richness often hides a shocking lack of true wealth. Wealth is income not spent. It is the financial assets not converted into stuff.
Spending money to show people how much money you have is quite literally the fastest path to having less money.
Most people who say they want to be a millionaire actually want to spend $1 million, which is the definition of not being a millionaire.
Rich is current, visible income used for consumption. Wealth is hidden, unspent income that provides options, flexibility, and growth over time.
So how do we acquire this hidden wealth? By mastering the only financial factor we can fully control, the decision to save money.
Right. Building wealth has far less to do with achieving high income or high investment returns and far more to do with your savings rate.
The comparison to the 1970s oil crisis is perfect. The U.S. overcame the energy crunch not primarily by finding more oil, but by becoming dramatically more energy efficient, doubling vehicle mileage, improving conservation.
Savings and frugality are finance's conservation and efficiency. They are 100% within your control, unlike investment returns, which are shrouded in systemic uncertainty.
And the value of wealth is completely relative to your needs. If you are highly efficient and only need half as much money to be happy, you are better off than a superior investor whose lifestyle compounds as fast as his assets.
Learning to be happy with less creates a massive, dependable gap between what you have and what you want, which is easier and more reliable than chasing a marginal performance gain.
And this brings us back to ego. Past a certain level of income, spending is mostly ego-approaching income. If you make $100,000 and spend $90,000, or make $500,000 and spend $490,000, the margin is the same.
Therefore, the most powerful way to increase your savings isn't to raise your income. It's to increase your humility, caring less about what others think of you.
Saving should be viewed as a hedge against life's inevitable surprises. You don't need a specific goal for every dollar. Saving just for saving's sake gives you intangible benefits.
Flexibility, the ability to wait for no-brainer opportunities, and time to think.
This unseen return on savings, the ability to change course on your own terms, is incalculable and far more valuable than any tangible good you could buy.
And in a globalized, hyper-competitive world where intelligence is no longer a reliable advantage because you compete with billions, flexibility funded by those savings is the new competitive edge.
It allows you to wait for market crashes, learn new skills, and develop soft skills like communication and empathy, setting you apart.
To leverage this flexibility successfully, we need to abandon the chase for mathematical perfection and instead aim for the strategy that is reasonable, rational.
We must accept that we are emotional, flawed human beings, not spreadsheets. Trying to be coldly rational in finance is an unrealistic goal.
Aiming to be reasonable is more realistic and gives you a far better chance of sticking with the plan long term, which is the whole game.
The malaria therapy story illustrates this tension perfectly. Julius Wagner's Jareg won the Nobel Prize for curing syphilis by intentionally inducing fever, recognizing that fevers can be beneficial in fighting infection.
That is scientifically rational. But fevers hurt. No one wants to endure a painful fever for a marginal health benefit, making the treatment profoundly unreasonable.
They take Tylenol because they prioritize feeling better now.
Similarly, academic finance finds the mathematically optimal strategies, but Harry Markowitz, the Nobel laureate in modern portfolio theory, split his personal portfolio 50-50 between stocks and bonds.
Why? To minimize his future regret, not to find the optimal strategy. He simply wanted the strategy that maximized how well he slept at night.
What is technically true can be contextually nonsense.
The Yale study proposing young people use 2-to-1 margin on stocks, a rational, wealth-maximizing strategy in theory, is absurdly unreasonable because no normal person can handle a 100% loss and continue the plan undeterred.
Rationality is brittle. Reasonableness gives you emotional endurance.
This is why loving your investments, even if it's an emotional, technically imperfect choice, is a hidden advantage. If you love the mission, the product, or the team, the inevitable downtimes are blunted by meaning.
Providing the necessary emotional motivation to stick with it long enough for the tails to pay off.
And sticking with it is paramount because, as we established, everything is driven by those massive asymmetric payouts. You only need to be right a small percentage of the time.
The vast majority of spectacular market returns since 1980 came from 7% of outlier companies.
George Soros noted, "It's not whether you're right or wrong that's important, but how much money you make when you're right and how much you lose when you're wrong."
That focus on survival, fueled by reasonable behavior, is the final antidote to the historians as prophets fallacy.
Since the future is unknowable, and the biggest events are always outliers that change the rules, your survival strategy must be focused on being adaptable to the unprecedented event.
The world will always surprise you. Relying on past worst-case scenarios means you risk building your financial fortress to withstand the last war, assuming the next one won't be worse.
A dangerous fallacy that risks ignoring the lessons of the Fukushima failure.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner? We've stripped away the noise and found that financial mastery is fundamentally about mastering your inner game.
It's prioritizing the soft skills behavior, patience, humility over formulas and complex calculations. It's realizing that the janitor had a better grip on reality than the Harvard executive.
We live in a world where intelligence is hyper-competitive and prone to unexpected tail events. We are constantly seduced by pessimism and the outward appearance of wealth.
Your single most enduring competitive advantage isn't high performance. It is flexibility.
And that flexibility is funded not by chasing high returns or using excessive leverage, but by maintaining a high savings rate, rooted in the humility to know when you have enough.
So we leave you with this final provocative thought. If you prioritized humility and savings and used that money not for stuff, but to maximize your control over your time and your freedom from external demands, what does embracing total flexibility look like for your life's greatest goals?
We hope these insights offer you a new psychological blueprint for building wealth. Until our next deep dive.